More than 40 people have been killed in 2 explosions close to churches in northern Egypt. The first blast happened near the St. George Coptic Church in Tanta, north of Cairo, as worshippers marked Palm Sunday. The second explosion took place in front of St. Mark's Church in Alexandria. Our Middle East reporter Sebastian Usher has more.
The blasts were timed for maximum impact, hitting Coptic Christians as they gathered to celebrate Palm Sunday. The first target was the Church of St. George in the city of Tanta. The blast went off inside the church, which was thronged with families, transforming what should have been a joyous occasion into a scene of horror. Egyptians were still expressing their profound shock and calling for unity as news came through of another blast, this time in the country's second city, Alexandria. There, a suicide bomber tried to break into St. Mark's Cathedral, but was stopped by security. The bomb was detonated outside, still causing many casualties. The head of the Coptic Church, Pope Tawadros, had been inside but is reported to have left before the blast. These were coordinated attacks, raising to a new level concern for Egypt's security and that of its Coptic community, which makes up about 1/10 of the population. The Islamic State group warned recently that it was going to intensify its targeting of Christians in Egypt, following a suicide bombing in December on the Coptic Cathedral in Cairo, leaving this ancient community more fearful than ever for its future. Sebastian Usher, BBC News.
Well, a little earlier I spoke to Bishop Angaelos, General Bishop of the Coptic Orthodox Church in the UK, about what the impact of the attacks had been on the Christian community there.
It's a horrific thing to happen, especially on a joyous day like Christians around the world, people celebrating Palm Sunday. And I received word just before our own liturgy this morning. I've subsequently spoken to our bishop in Tanta, as well as our representatives in Cairo. And we've confirmed that so many people have died. A lot of them would have been families celebrating in churches. And our hearts also go to the security services in Alexandria who tried to stop the suicide bomber, and most of them lost their lives as well.
I mean, this, particularly in Tanta, was really timed for maximum impact, wasn't it?
Well, they both were, because they were both trying to target very full churches on a day that is very, very well attended. But we saw that a couple of months ago at the bombing of the St. Peter's Church in Cairo, and again it was during a liturgy. So of course it's really difficult to understand the psyche of someone who tries to cause such indiscriminate carnage, especially at a time of vulnerability when people are standing and praying.
This, sadly, is of course not the first time that Coptic Christians have been targeted in Egypt. It does seem to be getting worse. The threat, risen to a whole new level.
We have had quite a series of things in the past months. It's almost been on a daily basis. At worst, of course, as I said, the bombing of the church by the cathedral, and now these bombings, but also individual attacks on Christians and couples, people in their homes, people in shops. And there is a greater intolerance there that is, of course, fueled by the caliphate and other people who really are unaccepting of the Christian presence in the Middle East. And the Christians in Egypt are the biggest Christian presence in the Middle East, still representing about 15% of the population, but probably about 80% of all the Christians of the Middle East at the moment.
What can be done then? What needs to happen in Egypt and further afield?
I think in Egypt there needs to be more of what's happening at the moment, which is just a greater accountability, a robust system of law and order that calls people to account and has convictions, because when that doesn't happen, we see an impunity, and we see an escalation of the violence and the terror as we're seeing it now. With the world community, I think, as I've been saying recently, we just have a very short attention span, and with things happening in so many places around the world, it's very easy for us to take our eye off certain places. Now, of course, we suffer greatly here in London a few weeks ago, in Stockholm just this week, across the Middle East on a daily basis. But we've got to pay attention that some communities remain vulnerable. They're still resilient, they're still strong, they're still in place, but they're still vulnerable and they need our constant attention.
You talk about vulnerability and the immediate impact of blasts like this is, of course, obvious: death and destruction. But just tell us a bit about how the Coptic Christian community is being affected longer term in Egypt.
Well, I'm extremely proud to be part of this community that has been seeing and being on the receiving end of these attacks for years now, and yet has never retaliated violently. And I think that's one thing that we need to be conscious of, that they're very resilient, but they also are indigenous people who see themselves as that. There is no desire for all Christians to leave Egypt. There are, as I said, there are millions, but the effect is they still go on with their lives, but they go on knowing that they are vulnerable. I've heard of families who have gathered together in their front rooms and prayed before going to church because they didn't quite know whether they'd all be returning.
Bishop Angaelos speaking to me a little earlier.